So this is my presentation essentially summarizing the key points in my book chapter. So my name is Alexandra Pavliuc, and I'm a PhD student at the Oxford Internet Institute. I'm in my 4th year, so I'm kind of approaching the final phases of it, which is really exciting. And I'm particularly researching Ukrainian digital diplomacy during Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, looking at the gendered differences between men and women Ukrainian politicians and the Western allies that they target most. So differences in strategies between genders and what they can really learn from each other. So the book chapter that I'm presenting today is titled Social Media as a Conflict Driver and a Tool of Participatory Conflict Communication. So most of the examples that I'll speak about today are about Ukraine, given that that's where my research lies, but the chapter itself does have examples from other conflicts. So before I go over the key kind of elements that make social media a conflict driver and a tool in participatory conflict communication, I want to tell you, I start the chapter off with a bit of a short story on the first Sunday after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So February 26th, 27th, 2022. So I have family and friends in Ukraine, but I live in London in the UK. And I was scrolling through Instagram, obviously in quite a really stressed out mood during that period. And I had this really kind of shocking moment where I went from seeing my friends in London enjoying Sunday brunch, as one does, and then to a friend outside of Kyiv and people in his village preparing Molotov cocktails and sharing that on social media as well. So these two planets, really not even world, planets kind of collided for me in this one moment on social media. And there were a few things that came together that I really try to pull out in the book chapter that I think this story reflects. The first thing is that I really felt like a participant in the war by seeing, just like how when you see someone having Sunday brunch or going to a concert or doing anything a bit more positive on social media, in stories in particular, because they're so kind of time relevant, you feel like you're in the moment. You feel like you're almost participating in it, whether it's Sunday brunch or, in this case, seeing what my friends were going through just north of Kyiv at the time when the Russian advance felt really like it was on its way, essentially. The second thing is that my friend was being really transparent about what the war meant to him in that moment by making a clear and conscious decision to share that video on social media. They weren't just preparing Molotov cocktails like by the boxes, multiple boxes. They were also filming it and wanting to share with their friends and family and presumably also strangers on social media, such as on Instagram. And the third piece is that my personal information environment is really captured here because, of course, maybe I was at Sunday brunch the weekend before, and friends that I would see once or twice a year before COVID are going through a completely different life. And because of my two lives there, my information environment reflects both of those. So when the algorithm decides what to show me, it knows I'm in London and I have my London-based friends, and it knows that I follow my Kyiv friends as well. So it ended up putting those two things together. So the reason I tell you this story and really those to bring out the key elements that I think social media the three sort of emerging elements that enable social media to be a tool and driver of conflict communication. So the first is participation. So participation and participatory war, this idea that people anywhere around the world can come together and communicate about a conflict using the affordances of social media, of instant communication, visual communication. It really brings people closer to the battlefield. It collapses distance and kind of provides a closer digital proximity, which is a term that I tried to discuss in the book chapter. And it can also increase international feelings of empathy and support for a side in a conflict when you feel more invested in it because you reshared something, you donated, or anything like that, kind of use social media to engage. The second piece is transparency. So participatory conflict communication, it takes military actions into the public domain on social media that used to not be as quickly visible as they are today. So it really kind of ushers in a new transparent war where content, so digital evidence in some other cases, is really globally accessible because of that transparency. And finally, while this transparency enables, we can scrutinize governments and armies and try to hold them accountable because we can see what they're doing. We can support one side in a conflict by kind of participating, by donating, resharing, things like that. This abundance of content on social media is also, of course, filtered by algorithms that dictate who sees what and when. So now I'm going to go through a few examples for each of these three from the book chapter. So first and foremost, thinking about participation, some people remember where they were during the first moon landing. I remember the first meme I saw when I found out that Ukraine had successfully struck the Kerch Bridge that connects mainland Russia to occupied Crimea. I found it the other day to show you all. This is how I found out about a massive military attack during this conflict. And it's because of memes for fundraising and news sharing that really bring people together and allow them to receive updates really quickly and in an engaging way. Sorry if you hear the ambulance. So sorry. I live on a busy street. If it happens again, I'll do a quick run. So sorry about that. So Saint Javelin, which is the page that shared this meme in particular. There's other ones like the Ukrainian memes forces and things like that. They just started off as a simple sticker, selling a sticker for $10 to then send that money to Ukraine. I have my first mailed stickers, somewhere on a laptop or a notebook somewhere. And they've raised, the last time I checked, definitely more than this by now, $2 million towards Ukraine by selling merchandise. But it started with a viral social media campaign, fundraising campaign of stickers, and this idea of Saint Javelin, which kind of looks like a Mother Mary holding a Javelin anti-tank missile that is US made. So just thinking, participation, when you bring together fundraising and morale raising with memes, the virality element there is and the ability to participate by sharing and feeling you're something greater. It brings people closer to the conflict in a way that increases empathy, I think. The second is the idea of becoming a digital combatant. So the North Atlantic Fellas Organization, which is a play on NATO, is a group of social media users who all kind of spontaneously, but then started coordinating to come together to actually attack, for example, Russian diplomats who share blatant disinformation on social media. So to become a member of NAFO, you would have to donate to a Ukrainian cause, and then you would get an avatar of a dog that's personalized. So you can then all come together, coordinate, and for example, harass a Russian diplomat who is spreading disinformation to the point where once it made them log off for about a week and then try to say, oh, I was on vacation, after they'd basically been dogpiled after sharing disinformation. So an example of participation that brings people together in a really kind of conscious manner. And finally, overall raising morale. The other things that have spread on social media since the start of this invasion is songs, viral songs, images of murals then get shared as well. So kind of bringing in that online, offline element. So for example, Saint Javelin, which is the avatar there that you can see on the top of the screen, is now actually a physical mural on a literal building in Kyiv, the photo of which went viral after it was completed. That, again, means people are sharing and engaging with this content about conflict and Ukraine's side in this case. So I think a lot of what this brings together is more digital proximity between people inside or near the battlefield and people around the entire planet who, without social media, probably wouldn't have had those more personal experiences that made them feel more empathetic towards, in this case, Ukraine. So I tried to play around with a definition based on a previous one that was not about this context, but it's kind of the feeling of nearness to a location or event that's facilitated by networked connections to people on social media who are physically near to or virtually discuss the location or event. So an example of kind of feeling really close to someone who's there would be Maria Avdieva, who almost every day is posting selfie videos walking through the streets of Kharkiv, giving updates on what's happening in the city. So just an example of kind of closer digital proximity we feel when we're able to see literal instant updates from people like this. So I'm at 11 minutes, I'll kind of scoot through the last two bits. The second key element that social media enables is, of course, transparency. So there's a lot of elements here as well that I think are really interesting. The first is citizen journalism, where citizens are able to publish videos and publish information about what they're seeing about maybe troop movements, truck movements that appear to be carrying military hardware, things like that sometimes can actually be in contrast to official narratives about what's happening in a certain location. So the kind of rise of citizen journalism and witness videos, and how they enable people all around the world to get better context on what's happening in a conflict is a really big one. The second one is the idea of very public diplomacy. So this is, again, more specifically what I research, and I will try to keep it short, where, citizens around the world now expect more transparency from their politicians because of more connectivity in so many other parts of their lives. There are studies that people expect more information, more frequent communication from their politicians than they did before. So very public diplomacy is the idea that, did you have a meeting or negotiation if you didn't tweet about it? So in Ukraine, Ukrainian politicians completely shifted their strategies on social media, particularly on Twitter, to almost completely tweeting in English, and having really a new target audience of Western leaders and publics. They used to only have to answer to their constituents, but now they have to answer to the rest of the world to try to get support and maintain support for their country. And of course, all this being done on social media makes it really transparent because citizens can, of course, then respond to and reflect on what their politicians are saying much more easily, sometimes in direct communication. Transparency also has not a negative side, but everything, therefore, is visible and can be looked at and studied, where, for example, Russia, for years before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, was running campaigns to dehumanize Ukrainians, call them Nazis, accuse them of war crimes that they hadn't committed, in order to facilitate dehumanization of them and to desensitize international populations to the death and destruction of Ukrainians by trying to dehumanize them ahead of time. And this is done in the public light, which means that we're able to see it and study it and hopefully try to do something about it, which leads me to OSINT, which is open source intelligence, where people are able to look at, the posts from citizen journalism and witness videos, dehumanizing language, all of this at scale to paint a picture of what's going on in real life based on social media data. But it raises the question of whether the citizens who publish, for example, these witness videos, do they become combatants if they're aiding in the military efforts of a country by publishing information that is useful to its military? So there's a lot of questions there about what transparency means for the people who are doing the posting in some cases. And finally, algorithmic curation. So, we live in an age where now it can, depending on which filter bubble you are in or you put yourself in, both sides can seem like they're winning depending on what content you're seeing. For example, the Wagner group, which was the paramilitary group that was in Ukraine, fighting in Ukraine on behalf of Russia last year a lot, they achieved over 1 billion views on TikTok, whereas the Ukrainian memes forces and other kind of more pro-Ukrainian accounts also had probably similar, really high amounts of engagements on other platforms, or even on the same platforms, but in different communities. So this kind of, we think, the transparency lets us pierce through the fog of war, but there's still framing that can be done on either end based on what we try to surround ourselves with deliberately or not. And then another thing about algorithmic curation that I think is thinking about longer term conflicts, people will say they feel forgotten by the algorithm because other, of course, conflicts conflicts are happening in the world as well, and the attention they may have once received, the engagement they may have once received, reduces over time. And not only because of algorithms, but because, humans don't have the capacity to focus on such horrible things for so long. But I think there's an element there with the algorithmic curation as well. And this brings me to the final point around social media. Is it a normalizer of conflict, or is it a galvanizer of support? It's probably somewhere in the middle, of course, where in a longer term conflict, unfortunately, we get used to seeing these really horrible images that we just want to scroll past afterwards. But on the other side of the coin, the positive ability to bring people together, to raise money, to fundraise, to raise morale, of course, is still there as well. And I think that a key takeaway that we need to consider is to think about how we can use the affordances of social media to push it to be more of a galvanizer of support and to understand those mechanics better than a normalizer of a long war, by thinking about how we can work with its participatory, transparent, and algorithmically curated elements. So with that, I think I'm a minute over, but thank you so much.